This was unbelievable. In the middle of the courtroom, in front of shocked judges and lawyers, a child prodigy pointed at a police officer, and it was his horse that revealed a secret no one expected. What happened left everyone speechless. And the twist in this story will surprise you even more. Watch until the end and subscribe to follow the latest updates on this incredible case. The courtroom in Willow Creek, Pennsylvania was packed that morning. Every bench was filled with spectators, and journalists from local and national outlets scrambled for the best vantage points, their notebooks ready and pens poised. The small town had never seen a trial like this before, one that had divided public opinion down the middle, with families taking sides and friendships strained to breaking point. At the center of it all sat Thomas Whitaker, a middle-aged high school teacher with graying temples and tired eyes. He maintained his silence as he had for the past 3 months, ever since he'd been accused of tampering with the school's financial records. His hands rested calmly on the defense table, but the slight tremor in his left fingers betrayed his anxiety. The charges against him could end his 20-year career and destroy the reputation he'd built in this tight-knit community. District Attorney Sarah Montgomery strode across the courtroom floor with the confidence of someone who had never lost a case. Her red blazer stood out against the muted colors of the courtroom, drawing all eyes to her as she presented what she called irrefutable evidence. The financial discrepancies had been discovered during a routine audit, and all signs pointed to Whitaker, who had been solely responsible for the academic department's budget that year. "The evidence speaks for itself," Montgomery declared, gesturing toward the stack of documents submitted as evidence. Over $50,000 meant for educational supplies, simply gone, and only one person had access to those accounts. In the audience, Caroline Whitaker clutched her purse tightly, her knuckles white. She'd stood by her husband through it all, despite the whispers that followed her at the grocery store and the awkward silences when she entered the town's only cafe. Their teenage daughter, Lily, had stopped attending school 2 weeks ago, unable to bear the sidelong glances and hushed comments from her classmates. Sheriff Robert Hayes, who had led the investigation, sat near the prosecution, his posture military straight. His testimony had been particularly damaging, detailing how his investigation had methodically eliminated every other possibility until only Thomas Whitaker remained as a suspect. Hayes was respected in Willow Creek. He'd served the community for 15 years, and his word carried weight among the townspeople. Defense attorney Michael Chen seemed outmatched. His arguments, while logically sound, lacked the emotional impact of Montgomery's accusations. He pointed out the circumstantial nature of the evidence, emphasized Whitaker's spotless record, but the jury's expressions remained unmoved. The trail of financial irregularities seemed to lead directly to his client, and Chen was running out of alternative explanations. Judge Eleanor Blackwood, known for her strict adherence to procedure, observed the proceedings with a neutral expression that revealed nothing of her thoughts. Her reputation for fairness was the only hope the defense had left. As the morning session neared its conclusion, it seemed like a foregone conclusion that Thomas Whitaker would be convicted. That's when something unexpected happened. A young boy no more than 10 years old, with bright eyes and tousled brown hair, raised his hand from the back row of the gallery. At first, no one noticed him except for the court bailiff, who approached to ask him to lower his hand. But the boy, Jake Miller, the son of the school's janitor, was persistent. "I need to say something," he said, his voice carrying surprisingly well across the now quieting courtroom. "I know something important." Judge Blackwood's gavel came down, silencing the sudden murmurs. "Young man, this is a formal court proceeding. You cannot simply interrupt." "It's about Sheriff Hayes," Jake continued, undeterred by protocol. "He's hiding something. I saw him." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Montgomery's confident smile faltered for just a moment, while Sheriff Hayes stiffened in his seat, his hand unconsciously moving to adjust his collar. "Your Honor," Chen said, rising quickly, sensing an opportunity, "I request permission to explore this unexpected development." This is highly irregular," Montgomery objected, but there was a new tension in her voice. A child's imagination should not derail these proceedings. Judge Blackwood studied Jake Miller's earnest face for a long moment before making her decision. "I'll allow it, but briefly. Approach the bench, young. A man." As Jake made his way to the front of the courtroom, a commotion arose from outside. Through the windows, people could see Sheriff Hayes's police horse, Thunder, becoming agitated in the courthouse parking lot where he was tethered. The animal was known throughout the county for his calm demeanor, which made his current behavior all the more striking. He was neighing loudly and stomping his hooves against the pavement. "That's Thunder," Jake said, pointing toward the window. "He knows." "Knows what exactly?" Judge Blackwood asked, her skepticism evident in her tone. "He was there," Jake replied simply. "At the school, the night when they say Mr. Whitaker took the money. Thunder saw everything, and he's afraid of Sheriff Hayes now. That's why he's acting like that." The bizarre claim should have been dismissed immediately, but something in the boy's certainty gave the judge pause. Sheriff Hayes's face had drained of color, though he quickly composed himself. "This is absurd," Hayes said, standing up. "My horse is probably just restless from standing too long." "Then you won't mind if we bring him inside," Chen suggested, in a move that surprised everyone, including his client. "If the animal is simply restless, his behavior won't change in your presence, Sheriff." "You want to bring a horse into my courtroom?" Judge Blackwood asked incredulously. Chen pressed his advantage. "Your Honor, I've never made such a request before, but given the stakes of this case and the seriousness of the accusation against my client, I believe we should explore every avenue, no matter how unconventional." The judge's deliberation was interrupted by Thunder's increasingly distressed sounds from outside. The entire courtroom could hear his agitation growing. "I'll allow it," she finally said, "but only because I want to put this matter to rest. Quickly, so we can return to the actual evidence." The bailiff was dispatched to bring Thunder into the courthouse. The logistics were complicated. The double doors at the back of the courtroom had to be fully opened, and mats were hastily laid down to protect the floor. The spectators pressed against the walls to make room, their faces a mixture of confusion and fascination. When Thunder was finally led into the courtroom, his reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Upon seeing Sheriff Hayes, the horse reared back, nearly pulling away from the bailiff who held his reins. The animal refused to move closer to his owner, instead backing away with eyes showing white around the edges, a clear sign of equine distress. Sheriff Hayes approached his horse, speaking in the soothing tones he always used, but Thunder's reaction only intensified. He sidled away, keeping his distance despite Hayes's commands. "I've never seen him act this way," admitted Deputy Wilson, who had helped bring the horse in. "Thunder's always obeyed the sheriff without hesitation." Jake Miller stepped forward. "Again, that's because Thunder knows what really happened. He was there when Sheriff Hayes took the money from Principal Dawson's office and put Mr. Whitaker's fingerprints on the safe." The courtroom fell into stunned silence at the accusation, broken only by Thunder's nervous shuffling. Sheriff Hayes's face hardened, his earlier discomfort replaced by anger. "This is outrageous," he snapped. "A child's fantasy and a spooked horse don't constitute evidence." But Judge Blackwood was watching Thunder's behavior with increasing interest. "Mr. Chen, do you wish to pursue this line of inquiry? Because if you do, I'll need more than an animal's behavior and a child's word." Chen nodded, a new energy in his movements. "Your Honor, I request permission to review all evidence collected in this case, specifically any surveillance footage from the school on the night in question, and any records of Sheriff Hayes's whereabouts." Montgomery began to object, but Judge Blackwood raised her hand to silence her. Given the unusual circumstances, I'm going to grant this request. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning, when we will reconvene with a full review of the evidence. As the spectators filed out, buzzing with speculation about what had just transpired, Caroline Whitaker approached Jake Miller and knelt beside him. "Why did you do this?" she asked quietly. Jake looked at her with those serious eyes that seemed too old for his face. "Because my dad always says that animals know things that people try to hide. And Thunder has been acting weird around Sheriff Hayes for weeks now. Dad says animals can sense when someone isn't being truthful." Caroline glanced over at Thunder, who was finally calming down now that Sheriff Hayes had left the courtroom. The horse's behavior had been strange, undeniably so, but could it really mean something? Could this unlikely intervention from a child and a horse possibly change her husband's fate? Thomas Whitaker joined his wife, placing a hand on her shoulder. For the first time in months, there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. Outside the courthouse, Sheriff Hayes made a phone call from his patrol car, his voice low and urgent. "We have a problem," he said to the person on the other end. "The Miller boy knows something, and somehow my horse is making things complicated." The person on the other end said something that made Hayes glance nervously at the courthouse. "No," Hayes replied firmly. "We stick to the plan. I'll handle it. But we need to be careful now. Very careful." As twilight descended on Willow Creek, the small town buzzed with the day's unexpected events. No one could have predicted that the fate of Thomas Whitaker might rest on the behavior of a horse and the observations of a child. But sometimes, truth comes from the most unexpected sources, and justice finds its way through the strangest of paths. Dawn broke over Willow Creek, with a tension that seemed to permeate the morning air. At the Miller residence, Jake sat at the breakfast table, pushing his cereal around the bowl while his father, Frank Miller, watched him with concerned eyes. "You did a brave thing yesterday, son," Frank said, reaching across to pat Jake's hand. "Standing up for what you believe in takes courage." Jake looked up, his expression troubled. "Sheriff Hayes looked really mad, Dad. Do you think I did the right thing?" Frank sighed, setting down his coffee mug. "In this town, people respect Sheriff Hayes. They trust him. Going against that kind of trust isn't easy." He leaned forward, meeting his son's worried gaze. "But the truth is always the right path, Jake, no matter how difficult it might be." Across town, in the modest bungalow that had been their home, for 15 years, Thomas and Caroline Whitaker were preparing for the day ahead. The previous day's events had given them a glimmer of hope, but they were cautious about embracing it too fully. They'd been disappointed too many times over the past months. "Do you think it means anything?" Thomas asked as he knotted his tie, his fingers fumbling with the familiar motion. "The horse, I mean. Could it really change things?" Caroline paused in the act of making their bed, smoothing the quilt with deliberate care. "I don't know, Tom. But Michael seemed to think it was significant, and that boy, Jake, he was so certain." Their daughter Lily appeared in the doorway, her face bearing the strain of recent months. Once vivacious and outgoing, she had withdrawn into herself as the scandal unfolded. "Everyone's talking about it online," she said, holding up her phone. "About Thunder and Jake, there are videos." Thomas and Caroline exchanged surprised glances. "Videos of what?" Thomas asked. "Of Thunder refusing to go near Sheriff Hayes. Someone in the courtroom recorded it, and now it's all over social media. People are saying things, questioning things." For the first time in months, a genuine smile crossed Thomas's face. "Public opinion might be shifting," he said softly, almost afraid to voice the hope aloud. Meanwhile, at the courthouse, Judge Blackwood had arrived early, determined to review all materials related to the case before the day's session began. Her clerk, Olivia Patterson, had pulled every file, every piece of evidence, and laid them out in chronological order in the judge's chambers. "Judge," Olivia said hesitantly, "there's something odd I noticed while organizing the evidence." Judge. Blackwood looked up from her reading, eyebrows raised. Go on. The time stamps on the security footage from the school. There's a gap, about 40 minutes missing on the night of the incident. The official report says it was a system glitch. But what, Olivia? It's just that, according to the maintenance logs, no glitch was ever reported or fixed. The system was functioning perfectly before and after those missing 40 minutes. Judge Blackwood leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. Who certified the footage as complete in the case file? Olivia checked the signature on the form. Sheriff Hayes, Your Honor. The judge's eyes narrowed. What had seemed like a bizarre sideshow involving a horse and a child's imagination was beginning to look like something else entirely. At the town's only veterinary clinic, Dr. Jessica Reynolds was examining Thunder at the request of Michael Chen, who had obtained court permission for an independent evaluation of the horse's behavior. Sheriff Hayes had reluctantly agreed, maintaining that the whole situation was absurd. Has Thunder shown any signs of illness recently? Dr. Reynolds asked Deputy Wilson, who had brought the horse in on Hayes's behalf. Wilson shook his head. Not that I've noticed. He's always been in peak condition. Sheriff makes sure of that. But he has been different lately, more skittish, especially around the... Sheriff, Dr. Reynolds conducted a thorough examination, checking Thunder's vitals, his reflexes, his eyes and ears. The horse was calm under her touch, showing none of the agitation he'd displayed in the courtroom. Physically, he's in excellent health, she concluded, making notes on her tablet. No signs of disease or injury that might explain behavioral changes. So what's wrong with him? Wilson asked, genuine concern in his voice. He'd worked with Hayes for years and had helped train Thunder when he was just a colt. Dr. Reynolds looked thoughtful. Animals, especially horses, are incredibly sensitive to human emotions and behaviors. They can detect changes that we might not even be aware of. Thunder's reaction to Sheriff Hayes suggests he's associating him with something negative or threatening. Like what? That's not for me to speculate, she replied carefully. But I can tell you this. His reaction in the courtroom wasn't random, or due to physical discomfort. Something has changed in how he perceives Sheriff Hayes. Later that morning, as people began filing into the courtroom for the reconvened session, Michael Chen was reviewing new information in the small conference room adjacent to the courtroom. His assistant, Ryan Park, had spent the night digging through every piece of evidence they could access. We've got something, Ryan said, pointing to his laptop screen. Look at this. Chen leaned in, squinting at the footage. What am I looking? Your traffic camera footage from the intersection near Willow Creek High School. It's from the night of the incident, during those 40 minutes that are missing from the school's security system. Chen's eyes widened as he recognized Sheriff Hayes' patrol car pulling into the school parking lot, at a time when, according to his official statement, he had been responding to a disturbance on the other side of town. But that's not all, Ryan continued, pulling up another window. I checked the dispatch logs. There was no disturbance call that night. Sheriff Hayes wasn't dispatched anywhere. Chen sat back, processing this information. So he lied about his whereabouts, and 40 minutes of school security footage just happened to go missing during that same time frame. Exactly, Ryan nodded. And there's one more thing. I talked to Frank Miller this morning, Jake's father. He works late at the school most nights. He says Thunder is always with Hayes, even on patrol. The sheriff never leaves him behind. Chen's mind was racing now, putting the pieces together. So Thunder was there that night. He witnessed whatever happened during those missing 40 minutes. And Jake must have seen something too, Ryan added. Maybe not everything, but enough to know that Hayes is hiding something. As Chen gathered his notes to head into the courtroom, his phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Reynolds. Completed. Examination of Thunder. No physical issues. However, when I tested his reaction to various scents, he showed marked distress at the smell of school cleaning supplies. specifically the industrial strength cleaner used at Willow Creek High. In the packed courtroom, tensions were running high. The social media buzz had drawn even more spectators, and journalists from neighboring towns had arrived to cover what was quickly becoming a sensational story. Sarah Montgomery appeared unruffled, but her frequent consultations with her assistant betrayed her concern about the new direction the case was taking. Judge Blackwood called the court to order, her expression stern. "Before we proceed, I want to make it clear that this court will follow the evidence wherever it leads us. Yesterday's unusual developments have raised questions that need to be addressed." Sheriff Hayes sat behind the prosecution table, his face a mask of professional detachment. But those who knew him well, like Deputy Wilson, noticed the tightness around his eyes, the way his fingers periodically clenched and unclenched. Thomas Whitaker seemed subtly transformed from the previous day. He sat straighter, and the despair that had clouded his features had lifted slightly. His eyes kept darting to the back of the courtroom, where Jake Miller sat with his father. Judge Blackwood continued, "I've reviewed the case files and found several discrepancies that require explanation. I've also received the preliminary report from Dr. Reynolds regarding the horse Thunder." At the mention of his horse, Hayes shifted in his seat, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face. "Mr. Chen," the judge addressed the defense attorney, "you may present your findings." Chen rose, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, we have uncovered evidence that directly contradicts Sheriff Hayes' testimony regarding his whereabouts on the night of the alleged embezzlement." He proceeded to present the traffic camera footage, the dispatch logs, and Dr. Reynolds' preliminary findings. As each piece of evidence was revealed, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew increasingly tense. When Chen finished, Judge Blackwood turned to Montgomery. "Ms. Montgomery, do you wish to respond to these allegations?" The district attorney stood, her composure slightly shaken, but her voice steady. "Your Honor, while these findings raise questions about Sheriff Hayes' statements, they do not exonerate Mr. Whitaker. The financial records still show—" "If I may, Your Honor," Chen interrupted, an unusual boldness in his manner. "The financial irregularities are precisely what we need to re-examine. If Sheriff Hayes was at the school during the time he claimed to be elsewhere, and if the security footage from that period is mysteriously missing, we have reason to believe the financial evidence may have been tampered with as well." Montgomery's objection was cut short by an unexpected voice from the gallery. "Sheriff Hayes has the master keys to the school safe," Frank Miller called out, standing from his seat. "All maintenance staff know that. He insisted on having a set for security purposes last year." Judge Blackwood banged her gavel, restoring order to the increasingly restless courtroom. "Mr. Miller, while your information may be relevant, you cannot simply call out in my courtroom. If you have pertinent information, you must be sworn in." "And the witness?" Frank Miller nodded apologetically. "I'm sorry, Your Honor, but there's something else you should know. The night in question, I was working late buffing the floors in the East Wing. I heard voices coming from the administrative offices, but when I went to check, I only saw Sheriff Hayes leaving. He said he was responding to a silent alarm, but no alarm had sounded." The revelation sent a ripple through the courtroom. Judge Blackwood considered this new information, then made a decision that would alter the course of the trial. "In light of these developments, I am ordering a complete re-examination of all evidence in this case. Furthermore, I want Sheriff Robert Hayes placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into his testimony and actions." Hayes stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. You're taking the word of a janitor and a child over a law enforcement officer with 15 years of service?" "Sit down, Sheriff," Judge Blackwood commanded, her voice cutting through his protest. "This court is following the evidence, as is its duty, and right now, the evidence suggests there are serious questions about your involvement in this case." As Hayes reluctantly sat down, his gaze locked with Jake Miller's across the courtroom. The boy didn't flinch, meeting the sheriff's stare with a steadiness beyond his years. Outside the courthouse, Thunder, who had been brought back for possible further observation, suddenly grew agitated again. Through the open windows, his distressed neighing provided an eerie soundtrack to the unfolding drama within. The case that had seemed so straightforward was now anything but. And as Thomas Whitaker watched Sheriff Hayes being escorted from the courtroom by his own deputies, he realized that the truth, so long buried, was finally beginning to emerge, thanks to an observant boy and a loyal horse who could not be coerced into maintaining a lie. The following morning, Willow Creek awakened to the front page of the local newspaper, emblazoned with the headline, "Sheriff's Credibility Questioned in Whitaker Case." The small town, usually so peaceful and predictable, found itself at the center of a controversy that grew more complex by the hour. People clustered in Maggie's diner, debating the latest developments over coffee and pancakes, their loyalties divided between the respected Sheriff Hayes and Thomas Whitaker, the teacher many had known for years. In the corner booth, Principal Diana Dawson sat alone, staring into her untouched coffee. As head of Willow Creek High School, she had been devastated by the discovery of the missing funds. She had been the one to report the discrepancy, triggering the investigation that had led to Thomas Whitaker's arrest. Now, with doubts being cast on the sheriff's testimony, she found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about the case. "Mind if I join you?" Diana looked up to see Caroline Whitaker standing beside her table, her expression resolute despite the dark circles under her eyes. For a moment, Diana hesitated. The two women had been friends once, part of the same book club, their daughters, in the same grade, but the embezzlement case had erected a wall between them. Diana nodded slowly, and Caroline slid into the booth opposite her. "I don't know what to say," Diana admitted after an uncomfortable silence. "I trusted Robert, Sheriff Hayes. We all did." Caroline's hands were steady as she placed them on the table. "I need to know something, Diana. Did you ever doubt Tom? Really, in your heart, did you believe he could have taken that money?" Diana looked away, shame coloring her cheeks. I didn't want to believe it. But the evidence seemed so clear. The records showed access from his computer, his passwords were used, his fingerprints were on the safe. "And now?" Caroline pressed. "Now I don't know what to believe," Diana whispered. "If Sheriff Hayes was involved somehow, it changes everything." Across town, in the small office assigned to the town's animal behavior specialist, Megan Chapman, Jake Miller was describing what he had seen the night of the incident. Dr. Reynolds had brought in Megan to help understand Thunder's unusual behavior, and Jake had been invited to share his observations. "I was supposed to be at soccer practice," Jake explained, fidgeting in his chair as his father stood nearby. "But Coach cancelled at the last minute, so Dad brought me to the school while he finished his shift." "And what did you see that night, Jake?" Megan asked gently. "I was playing my handheld game in Dad's office, but I got bored, so I went exploring. Dad says I'm not supposed to, but..." He glanced guiltily at his father, who just nodded encouragingly. "I was near the main office when I saw Sheriff Hayes. He was using keys to open Principal Dawson's door, and he had gloves on, which was weird because it wasn't cold." Megan and Dr. Reynolds exchanged glances. "Was Thunder with him?" Dr. Reynolds asked. Jake nodded vigorously. "Yeah, Thunder was right outside the window. Sheriff always brings him on patrol. I could see him from the hallway window. He was tied to the bike rack." "Did Sheriff Hayes see you?" Megan inquired. Jake shook his head. "No, I hid when I heard him coming out. He was talking on his phone, saying something about taking care of Whitaker once and for all. He sounded really angry." Frank Miller placed a protective hand on his son's shoulder. Jake came to find me right after that, but by the time I went to check, Hayes was gone, and so was Thunder. Dr. Reynolds made notes on her tablet. And when did you start noticing changes in Thunder's behavior around Sheriff Hayes? Right after that night, Jake said confidently. Before, Thunder would always nuzzle against the sheriff's hand for treats, but after that night he would back away whenever the sheriff tried to touch him. Dad noticed it too. Frank nodded in confirmation. I mentioned it to Deputy Wilson once, just casual conversation. Said it was strange how Thunder seemed skittish around Hayes lately. Wilson brushed it off, said maybe the horse was just going through a phase. Meanwhile, at the county courthouse, Michael Chen and his assistant Ryan were meeting with Judge Blackwood in her chambers. District Attorney Montgomery was also present, her earlier confidence noticeably diminished. I've received the full report from Dr. Reynolds, Judge Blackwood said, sliding copies across her desk to both attorneys. She's found no physical explanation for Thunder's behavior. However, she does note that the horse shows specific stress responses to certain stimuli. Chen scanned the document, his eyes widening. The horse reacts negatively to the scent of industrial cleaner from the school and to the specific aftershave Sheriff Hayes wears. Montgomery frowned. Your Honor, while this is interesting, I fail to see how a horse's preferences for certain smells constitutes evidence in a financial crimes case. Judge Blackwood's expression remained impassive. Ms. Montgomery, I understand your skepticism, but combined with the traffic camera footage placing Sheriff Hayes at the school when he claimed to be elsewhere, the missing security footage, and now testimony from both Frank and Jake Miller, we have sufficient grounds for a deeper investigation. She turned to Chen. Have you had any success recovering the missing security footage? Chen shook his head. No, Your Honor. Our tech expert says it was deliberately deleted from the system. However, we have subpoenaed Sheriff Hayes's phone records from that night, and we're still awaiting the forensic analysis of the school's financial records. As their meeting concluded, Judge Blackwood made a decision that would further rock the small community. I'm ordering all charges against Thomas Whitaker to be temporarily suspended pending the outcome of this investigation. He will be released on his own recognizance. Montgomery began to protest, but the judge silenced her with a raised hand. This is not a dismissal, Ms. Montgomery. If evidence still implicates Mr. Whitaker after a thorough investigation, charges can be refiled. But I will not allow this case to proceed with such significant questions about the investigation's integrity. The news of Thomas Whitaker's release spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. By mid-afternoon, a small crowd had gathered. Outside the county jail, some holding handmade signs of support. Among them were several of Thomas's former students, now adults with children of their own, in his classes. Carolyn and Lily Whitaker waited in the parking lot, their car adorned with yellow ribbons, the school colors of Willow Creek High. When Thomas emerged, looking thinner and more careworn than when he'd entered, Lily broke away from her mother and ran to him, throwing her arms around him with a sob that contained months of fear and uncertainty. Caroline approached more slowly, tears streaming down her face as she watched her husband and daughter embrace. When Thomas finally looked up and their eyes met, no words were necessary. He extended one arm and she stepped into the family circle, the three of them holding each other as photographers captured the moment for tomorrow's newspapers. At the sheriff's department, Deputy Wilson sat at his desk, anxiety etched across his features. The revelation of Sheriff Hayes' potential involvement in framing Thomas Whitaker had shaken him deeply. Wilson had looked up to Hayes, had considered him a mentor and friend. Now he was faced with the possibility that the man he had admired had abused his position of authority for personal gain. His contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of Angela Torres, the county's newly appointed interim sheriff. Torres, a veteran officer from the neighboring county, had been brought in to oversee the department while Hayes was on administrative leave. "Deputy Wilson," she greeted him, direct and professional. "I need to speak with you about Thunder." Wilson followed her to the conference room, where Dr. Reynolds was waiting. The veterinarian smiled reassuringly at him as he took a seat. "Deputy, I understand you've been helping care for Thunder since Sheriff Hayes was placed on leave," Torres began. Wilson nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I've been with Thunder since he was trained for police work. He knows me well." "Dr. Reynolds has a theory about Thunder's behavior," Torres continued. "But we need your help to test it." Dr. Reynolds leaned forward. "Deputy, animals, especially horses, have incredible sensory perception. They can detect smells, sounds, and changes in behavior that humans might miss. Thunder's reaction to Sheriff Hayes suggests he associates him with something that causes fear or distress. "What do you need from me?" Wilson asked, a growing sense of unease in his stomach. "We'd like to conduct a controlled experiment," Dr. Reynolds explained. "We want to see how Thunder reacts to various items and scenarios, with you handling him since he trusts you." Wilson hesitated, loyalty to his former boss warring with his duty to the truth. "What kind of items?" "Clothing similar to what Hayes wore on the night in question, samples of the cleaning supplies from the school, and objects from Principal Dawson's office, among others," Torres replied, watching his reaction carefully. After a long pause, Wilson nodded. "I'll help. Thunder deserves better than to be dismissed as just being spooked. If he's trying to tell us something, we should listen." Later that afternoon, as the sun began its descent behind the hills surrounding Willow Creek, an unexpected visitor arrived at the Whitaker home. Diana Dawson stood nervously on the porch, a folder clutched in her hands. Thomas answered the bee's door, surprise evident on his face. "Diana," he said, neither welcoming nor hostile, simply acknowledging her presence. "Tom, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice unsteady. "I found something that I think you should see." He stepped aside to let her in, calling for Caroline to join them in the living room. Diana perched on the edge of the sofa, the folder still gripped tightly in her hands. "After yesterday's revelations in court, I went back through all the financial records myself," she began. "Not the copies that were submitted as evidence, but the original files on our backup server, files that weren't accessible during the initial investigation because of a supposed system upgrade that Sheriff Hayes had arranged through the county IT department." Thomas and Caroline exchanged glances. "What did you find?" Thomas asked, tension evident in his voice. Diana opened the folder and spread several printed spreadsheets on the coffee table. "These are the original transaction logs, and these," she placed another set next to them, "are the logs that were presented as evidence against you. They're not the same, Tom. The dates, amounts, and authorization codes have been altered." Caroline's hand flew to her mouth. "Someone tampered with the records." Diana nodded grimly. "Yes, and they did it using administrative credentials that only two people had access to, myself and Sheriff Hayes." "And it wasn't you," Thomas stated, not a question but a confirmation. "No," Diana replied firmly. "I would never do in that, especially not to you, Tom. We've worked together for 15 years. "But why?" Carolyn asked, the question that had haunted them for months. Why would Sheriff Hayes do this to Tom? Diana's expression turned pained. "That's the other thing I came to tell you. I think I know why, and it goes back a lot further than the missing money." She pulled out an old photograph from the back of the folder. It showed a much younger Diana, standing between two young men in graduation caps and gowns. One was unmistakably Robert Hayes. The other was unfamiliar to Caroline. "This is my brother, Stephen," Diana explained, pointing to the unknown man. Robert and I all graduated from Willow Creek High together. Stephen and Robert were best friends until what?" Thomas prompted when she faltered. Diana looked up, her eyes meeting Thomas's directly. "Until an incident during our senior year. There was an accusation of academic dishonesty. Robert was caught cheating on his final exams, which would have meant losing his scholarship to the police academy. Stephen was the student proctor who reported him. Caroline leaned forward, beginning to understand. And what happened? Robert denied it, of course. His father was the mayor at the time, very influential. The school board decided there wasn't enough evidence, and the matter was dropped. Robert got his scholarship, became a police officer, and eventually sheriff. But Stephen never forgave himself for not pushing harder for the truth. Thomas frowned, connecting the dots. But what does this have to do with me? Diana's voice grew quieter. Last year, when the school board was considering candidates for the new ethics committee, you nominated Stephen, who had returned to town after years away. You said his commitment to academic honesty would be an asset. Hayes was furious when he found out. I saw them arguing in the parking lot after the board meeting. I had no idea they even knew each other, Thomas said, stunned by the revelation. Most people didn't. Stephen never talked about it after high school, but Hayes clearly never forgot. And when Stephen was appointed to the committee despite his objections, he decided to take revenge on Tom for supporting Stephen, Caroline finished, the pieces finally falling into place. By framing him for embezzlement. Diana nodded, her expression grave. I believe so, and I think there's more. The missing money, I don't think it was ever missing. I think Hayes manipulated the records to make it look that way. Thomas sat back, overwhelmed by the implications. We need to take this to Judge Blackwood immediately. I've already made copies for the court, Diana assured him, but I wanted you to know first. I'm so sorry, Tom. I should have looked deeper. From the beginning, instead of accepting what Hayes told me. As they processed this new information, the phone rang. Caroline answered, her expression changing from concern to surprise as she listened. It's Deputy Wilson, she said, covering the mouthpiece. He says we need to come to the veterinary clinic right away. It's about Thunder. The three of them hurried to Dr. Reynolds' clinic on the edge of town. There, they found Deputy Wilson. Dr. Reynolds and Megan Chapman gathered around Thunder, who stood calmly in an examination area. Jake and Frank Miller were also present, watching with interest. Thank you for coming, Dr. Reynolds greeted them. We've conducted several tests with Thunder, and I think we've made a significant discovery. She led them to a table where several items were laid out. A uniform shirt similar to Hayes, a sample of the industrial cleaner from the school, and a small electronic device. Thunder shows clear stress responses to both the cleaner and Sheriff Hayes' uniform, Dr. Reynolds explained. But his most pronounced reaction was to this. She pointed to the electronic device. What is that? Thomas asked, peering at the small black object. It's a signal jammer, Deputy Wilson said, his expression troubled. Standard police issue. For certain operations, it's designed to temporarily disable electronic devices, including security cameras. Diana's eyes widened in recognition. Like the school's security system on the night of the alleged embezzlement. Wilson nodded grimly. Exactly, and when we tested Thunder's reaction to it, he activated the device, and immediately Thunder became agitated, backing away and shaking his head as if trying to escape the sound. He associates the signal with something traumatic, Megan explained. From his behavior, I believe he was present when this device was used, and something happened that frightened him deeply. Dr. Reynolds placed a hand on Thunder's neck, calming him as Wilson deactivated the jammer. Animals don't lie, she said simply. Thunder is telling us in the only way he can that he witnessed something. That night, something involving Sheriff Hayes, the school, and this device. As they digested this revelation, Jake approached Thunder cautiously, reaching up to stroke his muzzle. The horse lowered his head to the boy, a gesture of trust that brought tears to Caroline's eyes. When animals and children align on something, Frank Miller observed quietly. "It's usually worth paying attention to." Diana turned to Thomas and Caroline, determination replacing her earlier uncertainty. "I'm going to the judge with everything we've found. It's time for the whole truth to come out." As the group dispersed, each with their own part to play, in the unfolding revelation, Thomas lingered behind with Thunder. He approached the horse carefully, extending his hand. Thunder sniffed it curiously, then gently pressed his nose against Thomas's palm, a gesture of acceptance that to Thomas felt like the first real vindication he'd received since his ordeal began. "Thank you," he whispered to the horse, aware of how strange it might seem to others, but not caring in the slightest. "Thank you for seeing the truth when no one else could." 2 days later, the courtroom was even more crowded than before. People lined the walls, and a queue had formed outside the courthouse doors long before they opened. The revelation of Diana Dawson's evidence and Thunder's reaction to the signal jammer had spread through Willow Creek with the speed of summer lightning, dividing the town into those who still believed in Sheriff Hayes and those who now questioned everything they thought they knew about him. Judge Blackwood entered the courtroom, her demeanor as composed as ever. The gallery fell silent as she took her seat and surveyed the packed room. Thomas Whitaker sat beside Michael Chen at the defense end table, while Sarah Montgomery occupied the prosecution's side alone. Sheriff Hayes, still on administrative leave, sat in the front row of the gallery, his attorney beside him. "This court is now in session," Judge Blackwood announced. "Before we proceed, I want to clarify that today's hearing is not a trial. It is an evidentiary proceeding to determine whether the charges against Thomas Whitaker should be reinstated or dismissed, and whether new charges should be considered against other parties." Her gaze swept across the room, lingering momentarily on Hayes. "I have reviewed all new evidence submitted to this court, including Principal Dawson's financial records comparison, Deputy Wilson's report on Thunder's reactions to various stimuli, and the transcript of Jake Miller's sworn statement. I've also received the results of the forensic analysis of Sheriff Hayes's phone records and the school district's backup servers." Thomas sat very still, his hands clasped tightly on the table before him. Caroline and Lily watched from the second row, their expressions a mixture of hope and apprehension. Beside them sat Frank and Jake Miller, the boy looking both nervous and determined. Judge Blackwood continued, "I will now hear final arguments from both counsel before making my determination." Montgomery rose first, her earlier confidence replaced by a more measured tone. "Your Honor, while recent developments have raised procedural questions about Sheriff Hayes' conduct during the investigation, they do not definitively exonerate Mr. Whitaker. We respectfully request time to conduct an independent review of the financial records to verify Principal Dawson's claims of tampering." As Montgomery returned to her seat, Michael Chen stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate calm. "Your Honor, the evidence before this court clearly establishes not only my client's innocence, but also the systematic effort to frame him for a crime that never occurred. The original financial records show no funds were actually missing. The discrepancies were created through deliberate manipulation of data." Chen paused, allowing his words to settle across the courtroom. "Furthermore, we have testimony placing Sheriff Hayes at the school during the time he claimed to be elsewhere, evidence of his use of a signal jammer to disable security cameras, and perhaps most tellingly, the consistent, unambiguous reactions of an animal trained to respond to his handler. Reactions that dramatically changed following the night in question." He gestured toward Jake Miller. "We have a credible witness who observed Sheriff Hayes entering the principal's office outside of normal hours, wearing gloves and using unauthorized keys. We have forensic evidence showing that Mr. Whitaker's passwords were used to access the financial system at times when he was demonstrably elsewhere. And we have Sheriff Hayes's phone records confirming calls to a burner phone registered under a false name. Calls made immediately before and after the alleged embezzlement. Chen paused again, his expression solemn. Your Honor, this case has never been about missing money. It has been about a personal vendetta, an abuse of authority, and a fundamental miscarriage of justice. We ask that all charges against Thomas Whitaker be dismissed with prejudice and that appropriate action be taken regarding Sheriff Hayes' conduct. As Chen returned to his seat, a murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Blackwood allowed it to continue for a moment before bringing her gavel down, restoring order. Before I render my decision, she said, there is one more matter I wish to address. She turned toward Sheriff Hayes. Sheriff, would you approach the bench? Hayes exchanged glances with his attorney before standing and moving forward. Judge Blackwood studied him, her expression unreadable. Sheriff Hayes, I have a question regarding your police horse, Thunder. According to departmental records, Thunder has been your assigned mount for 6 years, correct? Hayes nodded stiffly. Yes, Your Honor. And in those 6 years, has Thunder ever exhibited behavioral issues or refused to follow your commands before the night in question? No, Your Honor. He's been exemplary until recently. Judge Blackwood leaned slightly forward. And yet, despite your years together, Thunder now refuses to approach you. An animal with no capacity for deception, no ulterior motives, no ability to be influenced by rumor or speculation, this animal now reacts with measurable distress to your presence. How do you explain that, Sheriff? Hayes cleared his throat. Animals can be unpredictable, Your Honor. Perhaps he was spooked by something unrelated to me. Perhaps, the judge agreed. But when combined with the other evidence before this court, the altered financial records, the missing security footage, your presence at the school when you claimed to be elsewhere, it creates a compelling narrative. She straightened in her chair. Sheriff Hayes, based on the evidence presented, I am referring this matter to the State Attorney General's office for investigation into possible charges, including evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and abuse of authority. You are hereby suspended without pay, pending the outcome of that investigation. The courtroom erupted, and it took several strikes of the gavel to restore order. When silence finally returned, Judge Blackwood addressed Thomas Whitaker directly. Mr. Whitaker, all charges against you are dismissed with prejudice. You have my sincere apologies for the ordeal you have endured. This court finds that there was never any embezzlement as alleged. The financial discrepancies were manufactured as part of a deliberate effort to frame you. Thomas's shoulders sagged with relief, and Caroline reached forward to squeeze his shoulder, tears streaming down her face. Around them, people began to applaud, the sound swelling until it filled the courtroom. Judge Blackwood allowed it to continue for several seconds before calling for order. One final matter, she said when the room had quieted. I wish to acknowledge the contributions of those whose persistence and courage helped bring the truth to light. Jake Miller, whose observation and willingness to speak up began this process of discovery. Frank Miller, who supported his son and shared his own observations. Diana Dawson, who undertook her own investigation despite personal risk. Deputy Wilson, who chose truth over loyalty. And Dr. Reynolds, whose expertise helped us understand what Thunder was trying to tell us. She smiled slightly. And of course, Thunder himself, who demonstrated that sometimes justice has unexpected champions. With a final strike of her gavel, Judge Blackwood adjourned the hearing. The courtroom dissolved into a buzz of conversation and movement. Thomas was immediately surrounded by well-wishers, including former colleagues who had doubted him and now sought to make amends. Through the crowd, he caught sight of Sheriff Hayes being escorted from the courtroom by 2 state police officers, his face a mask of contained fury. Outside the courthouse, as reporters clamored for statements and cameras flashed, the Whitaker Family found themselves face to face with Jake Miller and his father. Thomas knelt to the boy's level, his expression solemn. "I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly. "You changed everything." Jake shrugged, embarrassed by the attention. "I just told what I saw. Dad always says that's what you're supposed to do." Frank Miller placed a hand on his son's shoulder, pride evident in his gesture. Sometimes the truth needs a little help coming out. Jake gave it that push. Caroline dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "What made you so sure?" she asked.
"Jake."
"When everyone else believed Tom was guilty, what made you different?" Jake considered the question seriously. "Well, I've had Mr. Whitaker for science class. He always talks about being honest and doing what's right, even when it's hard. That didn't match up with what they were saying about him." He paused, then added, "And Thunder knew animals can tell when people are good or bad." The simplicity and clarity of the boy's reasoning brought fresh tears to Caroline's eyes. Lily, who had been silent throughout the exchange, suddenly stepped forward and hugged Jake. "Thank you for believing in my dad," she whispered. "I'm going back to school on Monday." As the crowd began to disperse, Dr. Reynolds approached with Deputy Wilson. Between them walked Thunder, now officially reassigned to Wilson's care pending the resolution of Hayes's case. "Someone wanted to say hello," Dr. Reynolds said with a smile. Thomas approached the horse cautiously, still somewhat in awe of the animal's role in his exoneration. Thunder regarded him with intelligent eyes, then lowered his head in a gesture of trust. Thomas gently stroked the horse's nose, a lump forming in his throat. "I owe you everything," he murmured. Wilson cleared his throat. "The department is establishing new protocols for handling evidence and conducting investigations. What happened to you won't happen to anyone else." Diana Dawson joined them, her expression lighter than it had been in months. "The school board is meeting tonight. They've asked me to present a formal apology to you, Tom, and to discuss your immediate reinstatement with a substantial compensation package for all you've been through." Thomas shook his head, still processing the rapid shift in his fortunes. "All I want is to get back to my classroom, back to normal." "It might take some time for things to feel normal again," Frank Miller observed. "Truth has a way of changing landscapes." As they stood together in the afternoon sunlight, a sense of closure seemed to settle over them. The ordeal that had consumed their lives for months was ending, and while scars remained, healing had begun. 3 months later, Willow Creek had found a new equilibrium. Thomas Whitaker had returned to teaching, welcomed back by students and colleagues alike. Caroline had started a support group for families affected by wrongful accusations, turning their painful experience into a resource for others. Lily had not only returned to school, but had also started volunteering at Dr. Reynolds' clinic, discovering a passion for animal behavior. Sheriff Hayes was awaiting trial on multiple charges. His fall from grace, a cautionary tale about the corruption of power and the danger of unchecked authority. Deputy Wilson had been appointed interim sheriff and was implementing reforms to ensure greater transparency and accountability within the department. On a crisp autumn afternoon, the Whitakers hosted a backyard gathering to thank those who had stood by them during their darkest hours. Diana Dawson was there, as were Frank and Jake Miller, Dr. Reynolds, Deputy Wilson, and Michael Chen. And, at Jake's insistence, Thunder had been brought as well, now thriving under Wilson's care and gradually being retrained for community outreach, rather than patrol work. As the adults chatted and the children played, Thomas found himself standing beside Thunder, the horse contentedly munching an apple from the Whitaker's tree. Jake approached, grinning as Thunder nuzzled his hand for another treat. "Dr. Reynolds says Thunder trusts me now," Jake announced proudly. "She says he knows I helped tell his story." Thomas smiled. "That's quite a gift, being able to understand what animals are trying to tell us. Not many people have that." Jake shrugged. I think everyone could do it if they really paid attention. Animals and kids, we notice things adults sometimes miss. The wisdom in the boy's words struck Thomas deeply. You know, Jake, you've taught me something important through all this. Sometimes the truth isn't hidden at all. It's right in front of us, waiting for someone brave enough to point it out. Jake considered this for a moment, then nodded seriously. Like when Thunder kept backing away from Sheriff Hayes, he was trying to tell everyone something was wrong, but nobody listened until they had to. Exactly, Thomas agreed. And that's a lesson I'll carry with me always. As the sun began to set over Willow Creek, casting long shadows across the gathered friends and family, Thomas looked around at the community that had nearly abandoned him and then found its way back to truth. The journey had been painful, the cost high, but standing here now, he felt a profound gratitude for second chances, for unlikely heroes, and for the remarkable ways in which justice sometimes finds its path. In the end, it had taken the unbiased instincts of a horse and the clear-eyed observations of a child to reveal what adults had overlooked or denied. They had reminded everyone in Willow Creek that truth cannot be permanently obscured, that innocence has powerful allies, and that sometimes the most reliable witnesses are those society most easily dismisses. Thunder neighed softly as the first stars appeared in the evening sky, a sound that no longer carried fear or distress, but seemed instead to echo with the simple satisfaction of things set right, of balance restored, of justice finally, imperfectly, beautifully served. Dear listeners, we hope that Thomas and Thunder's story has moved you, showing how truth can emerge from the most unexpected sources. For more emotionally rich tales that explore the complexities of justice, loyalty, and courage, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it by clicking to your left. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring unique stories that explore life's complexities and the triumph of truth over deception. Our next story features another small-town mystery with unexpected heroes. You won't want to miss it. We're reading all your comments, so let us know which character resonated with you the most. Was it Jake's bravery, Thunder's loyalty, or Thomas's resilience? We can't wait to hear from you.